Hi there BookTube, it's Elena here and welcome to my first Elena's Reading Rex. So if you saw my video announcing this new series, you'll know that I'm starting a series called Elena's Reading Rex, where I recommend books specifically to you. So you can email me at ereadsbooks@gmail.com and I'll put that down below in the description, asking me your questions on some reading recommendations. Now obviously I haven't read all the books in the world, but I do read quite widely and I'm happy to recommend to you some books that I've really enjoyed, and in some cases books that I've heard about but maybe haven't got to myself, but heard from other people how good they are. So today we're taking just one person and I'm going to read you their email and then tell you her recommendations. So this email came from the lovely Kerry Ann. She says, I would really like recommendations of where to start with science fiction and fantasy. I've never read any science fiction and it's a genre I seem intimidated by. I always think it's going to be complex with mentions of stuff I'm not familiar with. I do have a couple of science fiction books on my TBR, but I always put them off. I love watching science fiction films and shows, but I just can't get started with the books. Help. And then she's also put, fantasy is a genre I struggle with. I have read the Game of Thrones books and enjoyed them, but found them tedious in places with not very much going on. I tried with Robin Hobb and found it to be boring and had to stop. I think the world building is something I really struggle to get into, and also the slower pace as an avid reader of crime fiction and thrillers. I like things to move fast with twists and turns everywhere. I really feel like I'm missing out and would be really happy if you could recommend me some books in each of these genres. So I am very much in the same boat, Kerry Ann, with a lot of these. This is how I started into science fiction and fantasy. I have very similar feelings about Robin Hobb. I found her books to be a bit sort of long-winded for me and a bit boring. I know a lot of people love them, so don't hold me to that. I will try her again soon. However, I think like you, I'm very much into that sort of fast-paced action with twists and turns, and I like a book that pulls me through. So the recommendations I'm starting with are with science fiction, and that you said you get quite intimidated by some of the concepts and ideas and you worry that you're not going to get them. So I've got a few recommendations here. I've got a YA series that I think you'll really enjoy, and I think YA definitely lends itself to being much more fast-paced and action-packed. So I think that's a really great place to start with science fiction, and definitely somewhere where I tend to stick a lot of the time. Also, I think if you like that sort of crime thriller aspect and you're okay with a little bit of romance in there, that you might like some space operas, and they're definitely things that I've been getting into. And then I've got a couple of adult recommendations as well. So let's get into the recommendations for science fiction. So firstly, I want to recommend to you Illuminae by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is a really brilliant science fiction story. It's told very differently in really interesting styles. You've got lots of interesting pages in here. It really pulls you through once you get into the story. It's a really fun, action-packed story with not too many in-depth complex sort of ideas, and I feel like the ideas are explained very well, so I didn't feel like I was lost. It took me a little bit to get used to the format and get into the book, but not far, and then I really whizzed through it, and I definitely recommend trying this one out. And now obviously you can continue with Gemini, which is the second in the series, and so I definitely recommend these. I gave them 5 stars and they were books that I gobbled up, so this is my first recommendation for you. So in the first book we follow 2 main characters. They're teenage characters. They've been living on a planet which gets attacked and they end up on separate spaceships. One of the spaceships has a deadly virus on it, and it's about them trying to discover who it is that's trying to get rid of everybody, why they're trying to get rid of everybody. They're trying to stay in contact with each other and trying to save everybody, and it's sort of a race against time. And then in the second book we continue the story, but we continue the story with 2 different main characters who tie in to the first story. So I really loved that way that we did get specks of the first characters, but we carried with 2 other characters sort of in a parallel storyline to the first, and I really enjoyed that. So first recommendations, Illuminae by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. Next up is my space opera pick for you. If you watched my channel for a while, you know last year that I raved about this series, and this is Fortune's Pawn by Rachel Bach. In this we follow a character called Devi. She is desperate to move up the ranks in her job, and in order to do that she can really move up a lot faster. There seems to be a fast track way. If she joins the crew of this particular ship, you sort of fast track up the ladder for some reason, probably because not many people survive. And so she joins this ship as sort of a galactic security guard and she is thrown in with this cast of characters, and they're wonderful and eclectic, and it's a really fun romp across space with some great fighting and action scenes and lots of twists and turns and some love interests in there, and I just really loved this. So I definitely think that if you want to try a space opera and something a bit faster paced, that you really might enjoy this. And this is followed by Honour's Knight and Heaven's Queen, so it's a trilogy and I really loved all three of these, so I definitely recommend this one. Next up, how could I talk about science fiction recommendations without talking about A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I adored this book like most booktubers, and it is very accessible to get into. This is very much a character driven story, and we're finding out about different galactic races, different species. We have a young woman who joins the crew of this ship. She's trying to escape from something, we don't really know what. She's thrown in with this array of characters who we find out more about. We find out more about their planets and their races, and they are given as a crew a job to tunnel through space, and it's just following their escapades doing that. It was just such a brilliant story, and you really got to know the characters and loved them. And although this sounds like it might be slow moving because it's more character based, it's definitely not, and I definitely recommend this one if you fancy trying a bit of science fiction and learning a bit more about some very interesting species. And then one which is, I suppose, classed as science fiction. I'm never sure if it's sort of science fiction slash fantasy, but I think it's definitely more science fiction, and that is the Red Rising books. So you've got Red Rising, and then you've got Golden Sun. Unfortunately I haven't got Red Rising, but this is Golden Sun, which is the second in the series, and then the third in the series, which is Morning Star. And this is by Pierce Brown, and it's brilliant. If you like the fast pace, if you like the sort of action packed, this has definitely got it for you. We're following a character. He's on a planet where he's been told that the Reds, which are underground mining, are trying to make this planet habitable by doing the mining for people to eventually colonize it. However, little do they know it's already been colonized and they're just doing all the grunt work for people. One of the young men finds out, and he just gets sent on this journey of infiltrating the different colours, and there's sort of a battle royale type game, and it's just brilliant. And I definitely recommend this if you want something a bit more fast paced, with some really fun concepts and ideas, but not ones that are too difficult to take on, and it really is just a romp through space most of the time. So I definitely think that you'll enjoy these. So that was the Red Rising trilogy by Pierce Brown. So that's quite a few science fiction recommendations for you, Kerry-Ann, and now let's move on to the fantasy. So the first book I want to talk to you about is part of a wider series, and it's called The Painted Man, and it's part of the Demon Cycle series. This is a really great fantasy, and I really enjoyed its fast-paced and action-packed plot. It's set in a world where we've sort of gone back in time. So people live in little villages and there's not as much technology. So we're sort of medieval in setting here. And at night time, these demons come out of the ground and attack the villagers. But however, the villagers and the people that live in the towns, they all use these runes and wards to ward their house. So they paint them onto different things to ward around themselves to stop the demons from getting in. However, over time, these get damaged, and if they're slightly damaged, the demons get through, and there's often deaths and people get taken. And we're following an array of characters in trying to combat this, and people who've decided that they don't want to just sit back and survive, they want to try and get rid of these demons, and there's all sorts of different characters and all sorts of different relationships, and it's really, really interesting. And I definitely recommend this series as one you can really get stuck into and get in depth with different characters and different races. And it's not as complex as some fantasy I found. The writing style was very easy to get into, not simplistic, but just an easy read, and it definitely pulled you through. So I definitely recommend this as a place to start. Now, the other 4 fantasy books that I want to recommend to you are all YA books, because I definitely think that if fantasy is something that you find a bit slower paced, then YA is a really good place to read fantasy from. And I mainly read YA fantasy, if I'm honest, because I just find it's much more fast paced and the type of fantasy that I enjoy. So the next is a series of books, and they're in part of the Arcana Chronicles, and the first book is Poison Princess, and this is by Cressley Cole. Unfortunately, I haven't got a copy to show you here because I read it on my Kindle. I whizzed through this story, and there is now 5 books, I think, out in the series, and it was through making this video actually, so I have to say thank you to Kerry Ann. I read books 1, 2 and 3, and I didn't realise books 4 and 5 were already out, and so I now have bought them and I'm going to be whizzing through them soon. Poison Princess is set in an apocalyptic world in Louisiana. We're following a 16-year-old called Evangeline, and she has these visions and she doesn't really understand what they're about, and then this sort of apocalyptic event occurs and loads of people die, and there is a young man called Jack who's sort of a boy from the wrong side of tracks. She doesn't really know very well, she's had very small interactions with, and all of a sudden it's her and him trying to find out what's going on in a sort of race against time. There's a tarot card theme that runs through this, which I really love. It's very original feeling and I love the way it was done, and this is just full of action and adventure and really interesting characters. It doesn't shy away from being violent and gruesome, which I quite enjoyed. Yeah, I really think you'll enjoy this if you want something a bit action packed, something a bit different, and something you can really get your teeth stuck into. The next I want to recommend to you is Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. This is a Romanesque book. It's set in a Roman time. We're following a girl called Laia whose brother has gone missing, and she's part of the slave caste, and she is part of the world that her planet's been conquered, and the people that have taken over are sort of soldiers and Roman types, and she is now part of the slaves. She takes on a job as a slave in this sort of training camp, and she is trying to look and find out what's happened to her brother. We then also follow a soldier called Elias and his storyline, and eventually they sort of merge together, and we just learn a bit more about this world, all the corruption and what's going on, and it's really, really good. And I am desperately trying to find time to read book 2, which is coming out soon, and I definitely recommend this one as a good fantasy for you. The next series I want to talk to you about is Falling Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes. I really enjoy this series. It's set in a world. You've got 3 kingdoms of Mythica, and they've got 3 different rulers, and they're all vying to be the ultimate power. It's got deception and romance and power struggles and magic, and it's just brilliant. And we're following an array of different characters and their points of view, which I really enjoy. I really find that helps to sort of mix up the story, and they all come together really nicely. And this is really action packed and very fun to read, so I definitely recommend that one. Next up, and finally, I want to recommend Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. This is a trilogy which starts with Daughter of Smoke and Bone, and I just love it. We're following a character called Karu, and she has been brought up in Prague, but brought up by some demons, and she has a wonderful relationship with her best friend Zuzana. There's a really lovely, strong female friendship the whole way through this book, which I really appreciated. It's really nice to see, and there's like angels and demons and battle for good and evil and really great mythology, and I really enjoy this. And it's a really fun, fast-paced, action-packed book full of twists and turns, and I just think you'll really enjoy getting involved in this world. There's everything that you want in a fantasy, but it sort of takes you from the ground running, and I definitely recommend picking this one up if you want to give fantasy a go. So anyway, Carrie Ann, there's quite a lot of different recommendations there. I hope that maybe some of these are ones you're interested in. Maybe you could try them from the library if you wanted to give them a go and you weren't sure whether you would like them. But I hope I've given you enough different recommendations to pick from, and that some of these pique your interest. Definitely let me know if you try any of these and what you think of them, and I look forward to hearing how you get on. Thank you for watching today, and look for my next Elena Recommends in a week's time. And if you want me to try and recommend some books for you, then don't forget to pop me an email to ereadsbooks@gmail.com. Anyway, I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye for now, BookTube.